Welcome back to the Nutrient Management Seminar Series. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Ken Greer, who will be presenting on Precision Agriculture. Are we there yet? Ken is the President and CEO of Western Ag Group of Companies. He provides strategic input and visionary support to the Western Ag Global team and the entire Western Ag Group of Companies. Ken grew up on a mixed farm near Ceylon, Saskatchewan, and with his father, he operated his farm for many years and still holds land in the area. Ken obtained his Bachelor of Science from the University of Saskatchewan in 1985, and after 2 years as a research officer in crop science, he returned to school and obtained a Master's in Soil Science in 1989. Ken started a consulting business in 1990, then incorporated Western Ag Innovations in 1994, with the main goal to promote the use of the Plant Root Stimulator (PRS) technology. Ken takes an active involvement in teaching and educating at all levels. Agronomy, soil fertility, and ag business entrepreneurship classes regularly invite Ken to lecture. High school and grade school commitments to teach resource management, junior achievement entrepreneurship, and food traceability and accountability are important investments into our future that drive Ken. Ken was recently recognized as a finalist for the EY Entrepreneurial of the Year 2014 Awards. Thank you for presenting to us today, Ken. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Happy to be here today to talk about precision agriculture. And specifically, are we there yet? I know that's a question in 2020 and 2021. Everyone's asking about a lot of things. But with precision agriculture, most of you feel that maybe we are there. We have overlap control with auto steer. We can fill the combine header up every pass. Obviously, we have some advantages to precision agriculture. Where I want to talk today about is in the space of agronomy. So precision agriculture and agronomy, my area of expertise is typically comes down to maps. We need maps. So 20 years ago, we did maps. I looked at where does soil water go in the environment, and we built these soil water topography maps back in 2003 for a research project that we initiated, and it was clear that in a hummocky landscape, water will accumulate in low spots. And where does it accumulate from? Hilltops. And those hilltops become locally dry, and the low spots will become wetter. And the side slopes and levels are basically a sum-zero game where net water on and net water off is the same thing. So sure, logic, water runs downhill, a topo map and water is useful. And of course, that's where it drives profit. On the right-hand side here, you can see the deeper green color is $240 an acre of canola profit per acre, whereas the hilltops are much less, maybe as low as 50 in some cases. And there's definitely a variance in the profit because water runs downhill. I would put to you, though, that that's not enough when it comes to understanding what agronomy, precision agriculture, meant to growers. To growers, it wasn't necessarily about what water or yield is where, low spot, hilltop. It was more about why is it there? How does it get there? And how can I get better performance? So best performance is actually what we're shooting for, return on investment. And that return on investment was something that is quite different than precision agriculture, because precision, just as a literal definition, is the ability to repeat an action with high degree of repeatability and little variance. So if I were using this Bakuni carburetor and my arrow as a screwdriver to hit that slotted screw, I can hit that slotted screw time after time with my screwdriver And the repeatability of that is actually my precision. So really, precision agriculture isn't what we were shooting for. We were shooting to tune this Mikuni carburetor, this soil engine, to get better performance. So knowing which screw to turn is more important than getting the screwdriver on the screw, and how to get the right balance. How do I get optimum performance out of this carburetor using the balance of fuel and oxygen? So air and fuel making power, that's really why I'm tuning. It's not got to do with the precision or the repeatability. More so, we want to think about that tuning in perspective of the crop. So a crop production function, understanding a crop production function is really the beginning. So what does it take to grow a crop? It takes water and heat, obviously, so the sun and the clouds, and all these things are connected. So moisture and temperature and light quality and soil nutrients. Well, I can get a soil type map and I can connect a bunch of the dots, moisture and nutrient supply maybe, and compaction. I get some ideas from soil type. Soil pH helps me understand maybe nutrients further. So a bearish map of soil pH and soil EC, maybe that's my base map that I use to look for these moisture and compaction and soil type differences. Okay, still just another aggregated look at what is where, not really the teardown of this soil engine. In Western Ag, our shop manual for the teardown of the soil engine is this book, nearly a 40-year-old book written by the late Stanley Barber. And it is a mechanistic framework of how the soil engine works. It's called Soil Nutrient Bioavailability. It's a fairly advanced textbook in soil fertility. You can read about Stan Barber by scanning this QR code or following this link. He is a very famous professor emeritus and former Saskatchewan farm boy. Understood nutrient movement using radio tracers very early in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. His teardown of the soil engine really started with how do plants grow, how do roots take up nutrients, and how are nutrients resupplied to those roots over time. So understanding the rooting volume, to Stan Barber, of each crop was as important as understanding the soil level. So when you do a conventional soil test, you're getting some measure of this nutrients as a static snapshot. When you use something a little more dynamic, and I'll speak to the plant root simulator probe, which is an ion exchange resin membrane that acts like or simulates the plant root. So we are simulating how much nutrient from solution is being pulled by the roots onto these anion or cation probes. Now, in Barber's teardown of the engine, nutrients in solution, important, that's like cash in your pocket, but all of your slowly returning investments of nutrients in the soil, organic matter pools and other nutrient pools, resupply those nutrients to roots. So it's important to understand that the soil nutrient supply is not just a finite bucket, it's a dynamic supply. That's really where Jeff Shano, I want to shout out to another Saskatchewan farm boy turned researcher, Jeff Shano, who invented the PRS probes in 1992, so that's 30 years ago, first applied them to the field as a potential for changing the conventional soil test mindset. So using a dynamic sink to absorb nutrients. Western Ag Labs, and we started off with that technology in 1998 and put it into the field, into farmers' hands by getting a soil sample that is not dried, not ground, not physically similar to the field as possible. We're going to take that sample into the lab. All we're going to do is wet it up and warm it up to lab temperature and watch that soil engine turn over to plant roots. That's what's in this small animation, if I can get it to run. Probes in wet soil, and we'll zoom into that membrane and see how ions are exchanging. Ions exchanging back and forth from soil colloids and organic matter and other slowly releasable nutrients sources to the membrane, and develops a picture of what the root would absorb over time. So 24 hours we're absorbing nutrients. Pull the probes out after 24 hours, wash off, extract with half normal HCl, analyze on standard lab equipment, and come up with numbers. So let's speak a bit about numbers. I have some time to drill a little bit about how PRS probes operate in the soil to measure that soil horsepower. So obviously, just like water runs downhill, soil temperature drives processes. So warmer soil makes the engine turn over faster. More nitrogen turned over when I run the engine at 32 degrees versus 5 degrees. And definitely for nitrogen, a big deal, and carbon respiration, so microbes are growing. Not so much for phosphorus. Phosphorus is about the same whether the temperature is high or low. It's less of a impacted by the microbial engine turning over. Back to water again. Obviously, dry soils turn over less, wet soils turn over more. That's pretty much how that system works. So wet and warm make the engine run. Cool and dry are obviously, the engine is sluggish. So knowing this, we can try to take this information one step further. So as a farmer myself, more than 27 years before starting these businesses of Western Ag, I sat in that tractor cab and wondered, I know all this stuff. I know the shop manual for soil inside and out, Barber's work. I know Jeff Shano has this idea for better soil test. How do I actually get it into the hands of growers so they can use it? You really utilize all of that knowledge. Build up the engine, tear it down, look at different crops. What we built was a simulation model called the PRS Cropcaster. And I would like to do a short demo of that right now, and then we'll drill a little bit more about how this Cropcaster simulation engine allows us to optimize. So here's the Cropcaster running real time. I have some things that I can set pretty simply. I've got fields and I've got places I've sampled in that field, and this particular piece of ground in the corner here where the hand is circling is a sandier, hillier piece of ground. I want to set how much the water storage capacity is, because obviously every inch of rainfall on a sandy soil is not the same yield, and watch yield over here of canola is not the same yield as every inch of rainfall on a heavy soil. So right away, I've rebuilt this soil engine predictive crop model to integrate the knowledge about soil moisture holding and rainfall. So sandier soil with 7.5 inches of rainfall, 2 inches of stored water, 9.4 inches total, or 9.5 inches total. Growing canola where it's not too hot, I should be able to get a 50 bushel canola yield. Now, why isn't it 80? Well, because I don't have enough water for 80. If I had more water, either stored in the soil or from rainfall or from irrigation, I could get 75, 80 bushel canola, especially if there was no other limitations of heat. So heat stress and water stress are reducing my yield potential. So unlike a yield goal with a lot of nutrient discussions, we work backwards from the constrained resources of temperature and moisture, back to that sun and cloud, to drive the potential. What kind of yield potential do I have? Now, if I have 52 bushels of canola yield potential, I need to get 156 pounds of N into the crop. 50 pounds of P, 125 K, 31 calcium, and you can see all the way down that the kind of full mark on the gas gauge is what the crop would need to hit maximum yield. What are these red bars? Well, the red bars are the calculated supply power of the soil, this poorer, sandier soil, to the root simulator that's extrapolated to the whole root system of canola for the entire season. So 7.4 pounds of N supply when it's 9.4 inches of water. If I do get more rain, I get more N. Now I've got 10 pounds of N, not a bunch more, but some more, because we know that water and heat drive the turnover of nutrients, but it's also driving increased yield. So that relative difference between the soil supply and the plant demand, now that is where the grower is hoping to get improvements in ROI. If I don't know where I'm starting in soil supply, and I don't know what I need in plant demand, how can I make a map to fertilize? I can't. I need to know at a minimum, what is the soil supply? If I did nothing, what would I grow? If I did something, what would I grow? If I did more of something, more nitrogen, what would I grow? And is there a place where more nitrogen isn't necessarily more yield? Is there a place where more phosphorus isn't necessarily more yield? And given the price cost of canola and the price of canola and the cost of fertilizer, I can come up with a profit per acre. So now I can hit those ROIs. ROI impossible to talk about until I have this soil engine and crop yield function rebuilt, operating on the shop table. Now, this isn't the entire field. This isn't like taking the tractor out to the field, but this is running on your desktop, on your lab bench, on your bench top in the shop. You can power the engine up. You can run the engine lean. You can adjust all of those carburation screws and other devices. I can keep this heat and or keep this fertilizer rate, and I can say what would happen if, what happens if I plant late. And I plant late and I get into a situation where, you know, canola is now losing yield because of flowering. Well, I'm likely over applying fertilizer because I really only need the difference between 5.1 and 113 is less than 100 pounds, 108 pounds, and I'm adding 121. So I'm overshooting it if I get hot and dry, or if I get hot. But if I get hot and I get more wet, and that can compensate, well, now actually I'm still running the engine a little lean on nitrogen. I could be putting maybe a bit more in on and getting more yield and more profit. So instead of 266, if I put on a bit more in, I might get up in that 270. 267 is the best I can do. Going less in, there's a bit more yield or a bit more profit. Going more in, there's really no more profit. So I'm in the sweet spot. So finding those sweet spots across the field, that's really what we thought precision farming would do for us, but it doesn't. Not in the current state of maps and proxies for soil properties and yield. We need an integrated simulation model and letting that run. Now, I want to back up and do one more comparative for you because it's informative on why is it that we know all this and it hasn't been applied. So I'd like to bring up just a quick demo of why this is and why it hasn't been applied. I really like these two videos contrasting about how the risk and reward of farming has changed. So when Granddad started farming that piece of ground, that hilly piece of ground, and broke it, kind of like this motorcycle race in 1942, and I'll use the speeds of the race and the risk of crashing as analogy to you cropping. When Granddad was cropping, he was maybe doing what, 35, 40 miles an hour tops. Each corner maybe 20 miles an hour. No worries. Look at the guy on the right. 167, 175 miles per hour. Every corner flat out. You know, the worst that can happen in this case is maybe you run into the crowd or you drop the bike in the sand. Well, that's just like a crop failure one year. You pick up the bike and you go next year. On the right-hand side, if you drop that bike, I can guarantee you that it will not be pretty. You will crash the entire farm if you crash that. You know, compared to Grandpa hauling ass, and that's literally, you know, what's in that picture. You know, your days and risks in farming are much higher. Every time out, you have to know how to play that game and how to play that game better. So on this right-hand side is the Isle of Man motorcycle race. It's run for over 100 years. I like to use this as a great analogy to the risks that we all take in farming, because over that 100 years of motorcycle racing, speeds have only gone up, but the actual risk involved, the risk of death, at least over the last 10 years, has stayed the same or gone down. So how can it be that speeds have gone up over 10 years, the last 10 years, and risk of death has gone down? Well, I'd like to play for you why. So these young guys that are riding these bikes today, they're on that track and they have to anticipate every turn coming up. They do that because they've ridden this track multiple times in simulation. They know exactly how fast to carry the bike in the video game down this hill so they can make the top of this hill, but not so fast that they wipe out making that tight turn on the top of Bungalow. So they can crash the crop in the simulation multiple times to learn how to drive it the fastest in reality, because the simulations are that good. So understanding that simulation tools have to get better so that we can run this risk reward scenario harder. That's what growers were expecting with precision agriculture and agronomy, and not really what's been delivered, at least to date. A lot of to date has been, you know, put more on in the low spot because it's wetter. Okay, but what if it gets too wet? Well, hold on, let's have a look at that. So if it's, you know, a clay loam soil and I'm growing along and I have soil moisture and precipitation and I have, you know, a wet year, and I have a wet year where it's excess wet in the low spot, my yield is actually less than if I have a, you know, the upslope might be where all the yield is. So these assumptions of more yield is more water is more yield are correct up to a point, and then they're the other way around. Same with heat. If you're from the Peace River country at all and you're growing cereal crop, you know, inadequate heat units is something that you worry about all the time. I mean, not enough heat is not enough yield, and most places in Milk River or Swift Current, it's what if I get excess? So excess heat is my loss of yield. And this kind of flat spot, well, that's where most of Manitoba operates, because they don't ever even think about a limitation in heat one way or the other, just because of where most of their soils for cropping exist. So each of these simulation trials or what if scenarios helps you ride the bike harder to see how much I could spend, how much I can return. Okay, I've got 4 minutes and I'm going to take you through a story about Granddad. So Granddad bought the piece of ground here, Smith's Quarter, and it's a bit of a secondhand story. It's not my story, but a close friend, He told me the story. Granddad bought this quarter. It wasn't very good because it was up in the hills and had some sand in it. And when he grew wheat on that piece of ground with 7.5 inches of rainfall and 1655 heat units, a bumper yield was 50. You get a 50 bushel crop, and he followed what the wheat pool said because granddad, every granddad was a good wheat pool guy, so he put on his 150 pounds of 3417, so that's 51N 25P 25P 0K 0S, and grew 44 bushels an acre on a bumper crop year. With the old wheat board varieties, it was near to the top of how much more yield I could crank out, sure, but I might not get high protein because on that wet year with pretty good water and only 50 pounds in on, I'm not to the top of the response curve. I'm not getting protein. Well, let's just lock this scenario and say, well, but yeah, but on the year where it got hot at the end of the season, that amount of N was just right. I mean, we're getting right to the top of that N response curve. We're getting to, protein now being built in the crop, not just yield. So build yield, build protein. Okay, that explains Grandpa, and Grandpa's a great guy. And Grandpa then went and decided to buy more land. 2 minutes left. He bought more land. He bought this home quarter, better quarter. That 150 pounds of 3417, better yields, higher on the N response curve. Why is that? Because there's more N supply from the soil. Oh, and then hog barn moves in beside Grandpa, and lo and behold, wow, look at the hog barn. My N supply high, my P supply high from the soil, my response curve to N, how come it's so flat? Well, it's because the soil supply took care of all of the plant demand. So again, how hard is it to get high protein on this piece of ground? Hog manure, magic. That's a granddad would tell you, get more hogs, get more manure. Okay, that's all fine. Now you take over the piece of ground and back to it. We're going to take over that piece of ground. We're going to commit this scenario to summary so we know what the fertilizer value is, how much we grew, what our profit would have been at 750 a bushel wheat, and what Granddad was cost of production was. Now, just something simple. We got a minute left. Let's look at what would happen if you take over and you tell Granddad, I'm going to grow AC Brandon because it has higher yield potential, and it sure does. Compared to the old wheat board wheats, at 50 bushel an acre crop, you're topping nearly 70. That's the potential. But if you fertilize Granddad's poorer ground with his blend for AC Brandon, you are going to have not much more yield potential and even lower protein. So again, let's have a look. Let's commit this to the summary and compare the two. 41 seconds. Comparing the two, we definitely have more yield because of AC Brandon, but we're not necessarily getting full advantage because we're not fertilizing for the optimum. Just a few seconds left, and I'm going to show you one of the optimizations. Run you just a spec over time here, but okay, so what would be the optimization? At 750 wheat and 55 cent a pound N and 40 cent a pound P, could I optimize this? Could I get the best rate of return? What would be the best rate of return? Okay, so the best rate of return, if I just let the computer optimize and say the last 10 cents in is 10 cents of value, what would that be? What would that be as a best fertilizer rate? Because I know that'll be my best profit. Last 10 cents in is 10 cents out. That would be cranking it up to 109 pounds of N, putting a full load of P on, growing 67 bushels an acre, and my profit now going from what Granddad used to do at 144 to what I'm doing as optimal now, 284. So a full 150 bucks an acre that Grandpa never knew the same rainfall and heat could generate. So lots more simulations you can play on the bench top, on the shop bench, to see what field, what crop, what fertility. Now I can get to these optimums. And that's really the promise that we were expecting when people said precision farming in the agronomy space. Thank you for your time.